But I just want to start off with introducing the topic, and in particular, telling you that when we were coming up with this topic, we originally had a much more tame idea and a tame name for it. Calling a panel Aikido and Protest was a little bit like shocking to begin with. But I have to say, I really am happy that we have embraced that concept and specifically this panel. And I'm going to share a comment that was shared offline with one of our participants from Nairobi yesterday, just a personal comment about really appreciating, being able to create safe spaces for people to have important conversations around race right now. A lot of crazy stuff happening in people's lives in the country. So the importance of creating safe space, but really hoping that at the same time that we are creating safe space, we are also creating bold space and brave space. So I think I want to put out the intention for this panel that we are not only creating a safe space, but also a brave space to have this conversation. So Aikido and protest, Aikido principles and protest. I think at its core, we all have been studying Aikido for years, and at its core, it is really a study of power, right? It is a study of relationship in power as well. And when we think about protest, protest is very much about changing one's relationship with power. And oftentimes, it happens to be changing one's relationship with power because you are someone who does not have power. So it is speaking truth to power and using the principles that we have in Aikido, the principles of harmony and connection, make this conversation super interesting to me. But I also have to acknowledge that protest is absolutely a threat to those who are in power. We have seen it over, decades and generations. Women didn't just get the vote. We had to protest for it. The civil rights movement just wasn't given. We had to protest for it. What we are seeing right now, too, is a reaction to systemic racism and police brutality that has been happening for years. And there are certain forms of protest, like taking a knee, during an NFL game, that didn't capture, the attention for change that suddenly protest in the street is capturing. So also looking at the different levers that we have to pull and when we have to ramp up our protest. And that becomes also, I think, very much an Aikido analogy of we have a toolbox and we know when we need to blend with a situation, right? And also when we need to enter. I'm borrowing a phrase from Taitel Sensei, and hopefully we will continue with it for today. So with that, to introduce our panel, and if I could, as I go through our panelists, if they could get spotlighted as well, so you don't have to keep looking at me. But I'm going to start off our introductions with Meredith Abel. And Meredith is actually in a really unique position right now because she is currently running for public office. So she is from Tempe, Florida, and she's a Sandan in Aikido. Or I'm sorry, you're running for city council in Tempe, Florida. Sandan in Aikido, and currently teaches at Strada Aikido, which is a dojo that she founded at a local mosque. She's also a public school teacher, and again, is currently a candidate for city council in Temple Terrace, Florida. So welcome, Meredith.
Thank you.
Our next panelist, is Kat Strada Sensei. And Kat is currently Dojo Cho at GI Aikido in San Diego, California. If we can spotlight Kat. She is passionate about the application of Aikido as actual self-defense. She encourages cross-training, and she has a whole background in Systema. Kat Sensei also volunteers and specifically brings her Aikido training to work with refugees on Native American reservations in schools and with homeless outreach. So she has a real nice background in blending her Aikido with her community outreach. Next, we have Janice Taitel Sensei. Started her training in 1992 with Taitel Sensei, and she's the founder and dojo cho of her own dojo, Aikido Center of Dover in New Jersey. She also started and runs a nonprofit, Aikido Access, and specifically developed a program called BEAT, so Being Empowered After Trauma. As part of her bio, I love it when people have bios that are super creative. She really claims the title of a fomenter of scurrilous activity. She just recently organized the Coalition of Independent Women with their recent petition to support women in the USAF. She is also a pediatrician and the mother of 2, which brings us to our next panelist. Welcome, Janice. One of her offspring is also going to join us on the panel, Sam. So Sam Sensei began her training at the age of 5, and she has been continuously training for the last 21 years. She spent time living and being a uchideshi at New York Aikikai, and she currently is in Minneapolis training at Eastlake Aikido. She also has a wealth of background studying cultural anthropology, sociolinguistics, psychology at NYU, and she is currently working in a really innovative after-school program. She worked at an after-school program at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and is currently in a program in Minneapolis working with a specialized population of youth development program in Minneapolis. She's also currently actively on the streets during the protest in Minneapolis. So we're really excited to hear her voice during this panel. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
And finally, our last panelist, if we can spotlight Kathy Park. Great to have you join us. Kathy Park Sensei is an artist, an author, an English professor, and has been studying and training in Aikido and martial arts for 40 years. I love it when someone also puts this in their bio, quote unquote, after dropping out of college, she apprenticed for 15 years as a stone sculptor. She's an incredible artist. If you have a chance, check out her website, beautiful art. And she also has been an author and has written a book in particular of interest to us, which is Aikido Off the Mat, One Woman's Journey Using Aikido Principles to Stay Sane in Mind, Body, and Spirit. She also has taken her Aikido off the mat and has volunteered for years running a holistic health program based on some Aikido principles in a federal women's prison. So welcome, really, really beautiful to have you here, Kathy. And
thank you.
Another thing too, that this often doesn't come into people's bios. We all live very complex lives. And in my personal conversation with Kathy before talking about this panel, she's taking a break from her chemotherapy and saying no to all these projects. But as she is battling cancer, she said, you know what, I prioritize what I do very carefully, and I am prioritizing being on this panel. So just to feel the weight of your commitment to us, to join us in that is really inspirational. So thank you.
Thank you.
So what I would like to do in the structure of this panel is to move through 3 different phases, because we all have different ways that we approach speaking truth to power. There is how we do that and how we manifest our ability to do that in our personal lives. And then there is also how we move that into more public spheres. So how do we speak truth to power, maybe in our own dojos or in our own Aikido organizations? And then finally, how do we take that power of protest and bring it out into the world using our Aikido principles? Maybe it's on the street, maybe it's creating public change in political office, but moving those principles out into the world. So I would like to just open up, and I may ask Kathy to start just your first response of how you feel that sense of your Aikido and your Aikido principles being how you have spoken truth to power in your life.
First off, I've had to wrap a black belt around having brain cancer. This idea of wrapping a black belt around an opponent came from working inside of a women's prison. I volunteered for 4 years. That was in the early 90s. And I encountered a fellow martial artist who, well, the prison slang for it is she was short and shitty. And what that means is that she was getting close to the end of her time. And so she was very tense. As you can imagine, making that transition from being in prison to coming into the quote unquote free world is really, really hard. And someone butted in line in front of her, and she almost clocked the woman. Butting in line is a sore point in prisons. This woman had a belt in Thai kickboxing. She was really upset about it. I was running a stress management group, and she called me aside and she said, Kathy, I almost blew it. I almost blew the code. I almost got sent to segregated housing. I almost blew my parole, all of it. And I couldn't quite believe what came out of my mouth, but I said, let's call her Sadie. You need to wrap a black belt around the woman who butted in line. And Sadie went, what? What are you talking about? And I said, it's not so much a comment about her. What it does is it puts you into your martial art body. It settles you. It makes you look at that opponent as someone who's actually offering you a teaching. And she went, okay, I'll try that. So that idea of wrapping a black belt around what is classically seen as an opponent, such as cancer, you can see it in the language about cancer, fighting cancer, battling cancer, losing the cancer. I refuse to do that. I am bowing in to sensei glioblastoma. Therefore, it became natural for me to bow into sensei coronavirus, who I want to give a shout out to right now, because look at what sensei coronavirus is teaching us right now, that we can employ a Zoom technology to expand our community and talk. That's amazing. How else would this happen? Anyway, I can wrap a black belt around several other figures and situations that you might imagine, but it's not so much a comment about their dignity or nobility or the lack thereof. It's more for me. I do it because it changes me.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Let's open it up to Meredith next too. Please jump in. Your initial response to using your Aikido principles in protest.
Just to piggyback off that, to wrap a black belt upon anything that comes to you as a challenge, I think is a good attitude to have. And I think that there's a lot of talk about the right way to protest. And there's a lot of criticism about whenever a protest comes up. And I think maybe a different angle to look at would be what's the right way to respond to a protest? And I think the uke-nage relationship is important to look at here, sort of a role reversal. Just like wrapping a black belt around a conflict, I think when we think about a nage, we're thinking about someone who's sort of in control of the situation or managing the energy somehow. Whereas uke is sort of the one who's providing the energy. But when a protest happens, the energy shifts. And I think that for someone who's playing the role of nage, it's really important to be a skilled uke and have the willingness to switch the role to tenkan and to be able to take that as a lesson to change and inform how you act. I think that's very important for our leaders, both in Aikido and in terms of government. Yeah, that's my take.
Fabulous, great. So let's move that right into maybe being on the street and protesting. Sam, can we have you jump in?
Hi, yeah, I love this panel, the Aikido principles and protest together, because for me, it really is what Meredith said, just turning the roles on its head and understanding your response to that protest and where that's coming from, rather than seeing it as an attack. I'm battling this, I'm battling cancer, I'm battling oppressors really finding how to move to a better space together, because you do have to do that together. You have to, protest is something asking for a different world. And so that change has to come from both sides, right? And I've been talking a lot about Arimi and how it is time for all of us to step up into that new world and really help others acknowledge and recognize what that is. And so this is what I've been doing kind of off the streets. But when I'm there, it's that role reversal again, where I'm the one giving space and listening and really meeting people authentically and honestly, because I have all the space and platform and privilege where on the streets, I want to give other people that platform and opportunity and really be a genuine connection when folks are coming to me in grief and in pain. And if I can handle that, what my training is meant for me to be stronger and to be able to do, I want to give them that platform.
Janice, in particular, kind of moving this conversation from your personal response as well as responding into the Aikido world.
I don't know how much you want me to go now, but a lot of my approach to protests is really centered around owning your space. And for me, that was a really hard battle to learn to do that and then apply it in the world. But if you look at the protests happening, you know, there's I Am a Man, Black Lives Matter, Pride. It's all about just existing and owning your space. And it comes to where just existing is protest, or it becomes protest when someone argues about your right to exist. Then it becomes protest. But as far as from Aikido, when you own your space, you're just there. You're open, you're welcoming everything. You're not expecting a conflict, but when there is one, you can maintain yourself, not lose yourself to them. There's so much emphasis on blending, and that's obviously a big part of Aikido, but if the whole emphasis on blending, you can blend yourself away to you're not there. So learning to, you know, own your space, and then from that place to Arimi when necessary. But you know, in Aikido, if no one attacks, nothing happens. So that's what it is. If I'm just here living my life truly and honestly, no one's going to try to stop me. There's no protest, there's no conflict, everything's fine. And the protest comes in when someone has a problem with that.
Let's use this as a way to talk about, you know, on some level, I have really been thinking a lot about the fact that we all have this incredible privilege of doing this beautiful art of Aikido, learning the principles of the art. But everyone comes to it from different places. And if you are in a place where you can practice Aikido and you have never had to protest or have had a sense of feeling an injustice, or have just by the very nature of your existence of who you are, based on your color of your skin, your gender, your orientation, you've not ever had to experience that just walking into a dojo might be challenging. So just to open that up of what is the place of speaking truth to power within the Aikido community that we have to offer? And I'll let whoever wants to jump in on this panel topic first.
I can start, Malory. This is Kathy. I was working with a homeschool consortium teaching Aikido to kids ranging from 8 to 14 maybe. And this was during the Supreme Court hearings for Mr. Kavanaugh and the height of the Me Too movement as well. And I was kind of enraged, and I wanted to ground that into something practical that I could pass on to these kids. So we sort of dropped Aikido one day and we did straight self-defense. And we worked with chokeholds, standing and kneeling, and then also the one that is visually the most scary, which is someone straddling you while you're lying on your back. And I taught all these kids to throw me and my husband off. And pretty soon they were all lining up saying, "Sensei, Sensei, choke me, choke me." Just for the thrill of throwing us off in a great big, in a great big fall. But meanwhile, the woman who was the headmaster of this homeschool was in tears, sitting on the chair. And I went and talked with her for a while, and she says, "This happened to me. I was assaulted in the library in my hometown, and I didn't throw the person off. It didn't come to a chokehold, but I've been terrified ever since. And thank you, because I had just taught her daughter how to deal with a choke." Yeah.
Great. So our response to protest in our Aikido dojos, yeah.
So if I build on that, I mean, I never was a protester or thought of myself as a protester. I ended up organizing the, it wasn't meant as a protest, but the petition to the United States Aikido Federation. But really, the thing that let me be a protester was that in the pretty much the first half of my life, I didn't speak up at all about anything. I'd been abused by my gymnastics coach for years, and I just was quiet and just, don't speak about it, and nothing, everything's fine. Just don't talk and everything's fine. I was, told to obey and to be loyal. So those were never really big values to me. And then eventually, I started speaking up when I found out that other people were being threatened as well. I spent a lot of time out in the desert reading the Tao Te Ching, kind of realizing that I'm no more or less important than anything else. But that was really in my head. And then I found Aikido, and then I started to be able to feel owning my space, and that was huge. So all these things are feeding in. And then in my life, I started to be able to speak up more and just living my life. I mean, I was always the only woman in my physics department. I was the only female staff member, and didn't think of those as protests at the time, but existence really is protest. And just being in that space and holding that space was protest. I had a female partner. I had a biracial baby, which, was actually a conscious form of, yay, let's make the world a better place. We got to make a baby. Let's, bring things together. So, and again, not feeling like protesting, but it became that when someone says, "Why are you doing that? Stop that. Why make life difficult?" So just doing it anyway is protest. Eventually, with all that, I started finding my voice, and I did that by helping other people. I started a support group for other people, and then be able to speak of things. And through Aikido, really realizing that defending myself doesn't mean hurting someone else, but I can now start to arimi a little bit, like Sam says, speaking up and acting. And my first real protest was that I tracked down my old coach, and I distributed flyers, the pedophile, all around his development, and that felt really good. It's like, and my life didn't fall apart when I spoke up. When, you break status quo, things don't fall apart. And then, we come to Aikido, and through all this, I'm listening to people, and I'm seeing not only women being really belittled on the mat, but I'm seeing every summer camp, I'm seeing all the women at the registration table doing all the work, and all the men at the testing table making all the decisions. And, that's all that wasn't okay. So I stood up one time in a summer camp and asked, when will there be a woman on the technical committee? And everyone gasped. It was, so how dare she speak of that? It's terrible. And I was told that, if ever a woman was worthy, they'd put her on the technical committee, but no woman was worthy. So we can't do that. So anyway, so then I got together and I did I saw that any woman speaking up will be shot down. And I thought I was the one to do this because I'm nobody. I don't worry about losing my place in the hierarchy or anything like that. So rather than standing up by myself and getting shot down just like everyone else, I organized a small group of women who were willing to stand up and put their names out there and ask the organization to support women, and not asking for anything special, but just that women are important, and can they be represented properly, have statistics to monitor properly. And we started the petition so we'd engage more people. So instead of going as an individual, we'd go as a group of all the signers. And that didn't have to be a protest. They could have just said, hey, that's important. That's a good idea. Let's do that. No protest. It's just existing. But instead, they took it as a real attack and started attacking back. And whereas we did this because people were afraid, they responded in a way that proved that people had a reason to be afraid, and it became a protest. It got a lot of support. It really exposed how they work. I don't know if it made any real changes. In fact, they kind of dug their heels in and to squash future protests, but I think people could see, and just if your protest doesn't change that one spot, maybe it's heard in wider areas than that. So that was my experience with the Aikido world with that protest.
I love what my mom said about existence as protest, because right, as a young queer Black woman on the mat, that's not a normal statistic that folks have in their dojo. I also don't want to live in a world where my existence is protest. By stepping on the mat, I'm rebelling in some way because I'm not in the slot that's fitted for me. And also really finding a voice when you see and acknowledge the pain of others, having that power to step up, where if right now I'm not there for me because I have to find more value in myself, truly I can do it for this group because they don't deserve that. If we can see that other people don't deserve the treatment that they get, why can't we appreciate ourselves in that same way? And so this awareness that I hope Aikido trains us to explore ourselves, to really look both in our implicit biases and also just what value we can offer ourselves and to the world in a good way. So Aikido and protest, for me, it's obviously not restricted to the tatami, because I don't solely exist on the mat as this silent training student who I will train my best and my hardest. And I definitely feel like, in a way, I did do that for a long time because I can trade hard, I can wipe the mats, and really that training was a place where I could escape, and I just kept Aikido as a safe place for me to escape from the other things in the world, but it made no sense because I was still experiencing the same things. It was just because I could recede into my own training and focus on that, but that wasn't a genuine connection with myself or with anyone else on the mat. And I do feel like I can connect with people pretty well. I've been working on it my whole life and will continue to. But obviously having to stretch that past the mat, which is, I think, that gap that many people find they run into.
I mean, I'm just kind of overwhelmed by the beauty of the words I just heard from Sam Sensei and from everybody before that. You know, I'm just really inspired. My own, you know, on a personal level, I've definitely spoken truth to power in careers and Aikido, you know, in life. And it's been it's still a struggle sometimes to feel okay with that. And it's interesting for looking inside and noticing, even in a position of supposing to teach others how to be authentic in this beautiful art, I still find a little fear. So a lot of the protests have really brought up change I need to make in myself. And of course, as Aikido people, that's what we talk about. We change ourselves first, and then we can change others or blend. So I'm just inspired by the conversation. I could go on and on about personal Aikido protests, but what I was thinking with the last conversation just about day-to-day life was I was a fisherman. And it was, you know, reporters would want to talk to me because I was the only female fisherman. I was the only captain at that time at that place. Everybody wanted to know about the sexism and how hard it was. And I would always just kind of hold my nose down and be like, it's not that bad, it's fine. Girls, let's go fishing. So I kind of was protesting somewhat silently. And after about 5 or 6 years of dealing with it silently, I noticed things just kind of got better. So in a way, I feel like if I spoke up sooner and just said, hey guys, don't treat me like this, yeah, it probably would have been better. But at the same time, you know, I endured a few years of being silent too long, and I still learned from that. So I'm just enjoying, you know, all the information and all the opportunities to grow and heal ourselves and others with whatever form of protest we take, you know, whether it takes us a while, whether some people don't choose to run out there and be so loud, or if they're out there on the front lines first day. The whole spectrum it's just an interesting experience, really. Yeah. And I apologize again for my intermittentness with the computer.
To jump on the back of that, I think I hate chanting. I don't like loud noises. It's not how I function. And so I've been writing a lot and trying to compose that. But I mean, still putting myself in those uncomfortable situations because, right, I'm there in my training. My ear is still messed up from a firework that exploded right next to me. And I'm going to march and chanting and having that control over my body and my breathing, my space to exist in those places. My training has helped exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
And still kind of what my mom spoke of and what I've been talking about, Arimi in this daily life of just, right, cutting it immediately. Like, hey, you said a racist thing. Want to think about that? Let's go back. Let's review it. Rather, when I'm on the streets, it feels like a lot. I'm using my training to expand the moment and really let the connection carry through a long time when the other person is in a place to make that connection too. Rather than maybe an altercation and coming back hours later, finding that person and having a conversation. So really playing with timing, right? On the mat, maybe an hour and a half class or a longer seminar, but playing with timing in a different way to really make those connections authentic has been fascinating, infuriating, really hard, but obviously I'm still training.
Yeah, oh, beautiful. And this really takes us into kind of our Aikido in the world, and specifically with the current events happening right now. And I wanted to just have panelists respond to even within, posting this panel, there were responses that said things like, you're infuriating me by bringing politics into Aikido. Keep Aikido off the mat, or keep politics off the Aikido mat. And I'm just so intrigued by that response. When the entire world right now is realizing that they cannot keep silence. I know Meredith had a sign when we were originally talking that she's been protesting with. Do you have it with you, Meredith?
No, I don't have it with me, but I do think that a lot of times people like to say something is political to deny its validity and take it off the table. Like, oh, I don't get into politics, or, oh, I wish we would keep the political stuff out of Aikido. But I think that people misclassify things as political when it's really about protecting. And I have two really great quotes from Taitel Sensei's book, Aikido and the Harmony of Nature, that I think are really apt that I'd like to share with you all. So let me share my screen really quick. Oh, it says the host has disabled participant screen sharing, but that's okay, I'll just read it to you. So the first one.
Maybe we can help with that and undo that. I'm not sure,
Yep.
but yeah.
Can I do it? Okay, does that work? Okay, here we go.
There we go.
Can you see it? Okay.
Yes.
Let me put it on slideshow. Okay. It says, O Sensei's dream is for the world to be, hold on, let me move it. Okay. O Sensei's dream is for the world to be truly one family, without hatred, without prejudice. Through Aikido, we must set an example by our actions. If we allow ourselves to become controlled by power struggles and political conflicts, it will choke O Sensei's true spirit. The gate that he opened will be closed by fear, selfish ego, and blind loyalty. So this quote makes it sound like protest and getting involved in political things is a bad idea and it breaks down harmony. But if we take a look at this other quote, it's a little bit longer, but it's very powerful. It says, love of the enemy is a very strict love. Sometimes for the protection of others, that love means destruction. This is not an excuse for wrongdoing. To take the responsibility for destruction, nature's cleansing system must be fully understood. The object of destruction must be truly a danger to social welfare. A dairy cow drinks the pure water from a stream and gives nourishing milk, but a poisonous snake drinking the same water from the same stream can only make poison. Society must be protected. The rights of the individual and of individuality must be protected. The weak and the children must be protected, but personal ego cannot be involved. It must be an act of purification, of true misogi, and you must accept the spiritual consequences for the action. If you must kill the enemy, then first you must die. If there is attachment to selfish ego, there is no objectivity, and the health and harmony of society will be destroyed. And I think this is very powerful because when we look at social issues like the police brutality and discrimination that are still a part of our society, we have to understand that these things really do undermine public safety and people's ability to live their full lives. So it's not a political issue. It's an issue that we have to take a side on and that we have to have decisive leadership about. And I think ultimately that takes a look at ourselves, makes us take a look at ourselves in order to do that.
I'd like to jump in if I may. I know that the genesis story of Aikido is taken on a legendary kind of feel, and so I'm not going to represent it accurately, I'm sure, but I'm sure everyone's heard the story about Sensei in the garden having an epiphany. But, and out of that, the idea for Aikido was born. But look at the historical context of that. If I'm not mistaken, that was post-World War II, post-Nagasaki, post-Hiroshima. My point is, I think that Aikido was created as a protest. Aikido is a protest in the most profound and positive sense of that word. It's providing us an alternative to what will clearly lead to self-destruction. And if that's not the merging of personal and political, I don't know what is. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about my life. I'm talking about your life. I'm talking about everybody's life. We have to make a big change, and that scares the shit out of a lot of people. I understand that. But I don't know, brain cancer talking. Yeah, okay.
I love that and completely agree that Aikido in its formulation of love was an act of protest, a kind of against, right, the world that he was experiencing. I want to say also that I feel like there's been a lot of cherry picking of Sensei quotes, the same way with Martin Luther King Jr., just this convenient whitewashing for the right way to protest. Mm-hmm. And I do still, just like right from Aikido, authentically believe the only way to meet a community or a person in crisis is with love. That's not ooey, gushy, mushy. You can love ferociously. Loving what? Loving the world that we could live in. That's still meeting it with love. There's a lot of ways to get there and to train, but you're right, sometimes an enemy needs to be cut down with love. And you, as you said, you have to kind of kill and make peace with yourself in the same sense in order to do that, to protect the people that need protecting and to protect yourself, because the poison infects us all and we all have to do our own work to make it so that we could be in a better place.
Beautiful. I have to jump in on that, Sam, too. Just in terms of, I've also been hearing people talk about Aikido being used as kind of a spiritual bypass. We're kind of above all of this. But to realize that Aikido in and of itself is protest and that love is protest. And I'm going to throw out my favorite Martin Luther King quote, which I hope I'm not misquoting for you, Sam, but it's one of the unknown ones. But he said, Dr. King said, love is not the answer. It is the assignment. Right? Love is not the answer. It is the assignment. It is work, right? Aikido might not be the answer. Aikido might be the assignment, right? That we use as we deal with our protest in these current times.
I think Aikido is a great means of self-examination, which we should always be doing. One thing with protests is people, really the bad guys, have been really sure they were right. So I think it's always good to look at that in ourselves. But while you're examining that, hold on to yourself. So, you know, in Aikido, I'm not gonna tell you you're attacking me wrong. Whatever attacking you're gonna come at me with is fine. I can welcome that, keep myself and redirect. And the typical attack to protest is you protested wrong. You know, they redirected. So, you know, you're kneeling down, you're attacking the military and the flag rather than police brutality. They you know, we're attacking the USAF and not just saying, hey, we want women to be treated fairly. You know, they changed the narrative. So it's important to hold on to where you are. On the other hand, don't be so sure because other people have been wrong and thought they were right. But the other thing to examine yourself is my goal to exist, and in the course of that, maybe someone by attacking me might hurt themselves versus I want to hurt them. And that's a line that in Aikido I think we shouldn't cross. Not to be, I'm not responsible for you injuring yourself, but I'm gonna do my best to make sure you don't. So again, there's things to think about as you're protesting. But Amy, in Aikido, I'm gonna have my position. I'm gonna get to a perfect place, and then I kind of like a tornado. I mean, like I'm the eye of the storm, and everything can come around, and I keep my own center. Maybe swoop up some more resources on the way. But I'm not trying to hurt you. The more you come in at me, the more maybe you're gonna not fare as well. So those things, just you're not trying to hurt the opponent, but you're not losing yourself. I think are good Aikido principles in this.
Let's keep this conversation going, but I just want to make a quick comment that I will be opening up and looking for specific questions. A great chat conversation. If people have specific questions for the panelists, please type them in. And Sam, take it away.
I also want to add, right, if someone attacks you, like my mom said, you're not trying to hurt them, but also there is a temi in many ways. And sometimes people need that jolt to react and to be off balance and to reinvestigate themselves and make a new plan. Because if you don't give that a temi, they're just going to continue on their way. And that way may be dangerous for other people. You may be out of danger and safe, but just like classically in Aikido, if you let them go past, you don't know who else they're going to hurt down the line. So I spoke to this a little yesterday, but if you have the power, the strength from your training to be the end of that line, the buck stops here kind of, to make that a rimi and that a temi and make that person reevaluate themselves, hopefully, maybe in a good way, maybe in a kill the enemy way, but it has to stop with someone somewhere. So if you can be that person, you can't just let them go past, you really have to enter. I think of ski riminage, and specifically one class where I was in Uchideshi, and Uchideshi came back, and there's beef. And so Yamada Sensei had us do ski riminage the first 20 minutes, and we were just the direct, like hounding each other. There was just forearms to ears and jaws and laying out. I think that helped me grow because I got up every single time, and it was really fun. But that's also an environment that I put myself in and agreed with. And we could do that because we both trained. We both trained in Aikido. Meeting someone off the mat in the same way, their reaction won't be getting up again. They may be a little sore. They may still be on the ground. So having that strength and that power to help them up again is, I think, one of the principles of Aikido that we also have to focus on. You can put someone on their back, and that may be very valid and necessary. But then also having the love to help them up again is where our power should come from.
Something Sam said that I really liked was sometimes you need an atemi. And there have been many times in my life where I have needed an atemi. And when someone has given me one, it's made things better. It hurt, but it made things better. And like what you said, helping somebody up after that really goes a long way. And I think a protest is an atemi. And I think ultimately protest is a sign of a very deep optimism. And even though it hurts, it's the idea that we can do better. And we should do better. And I believe that we will do better. And that's why all of this happens, and we have to take it seriously.
I think it was Maya Angelou that said, do your best, and then when you learn to do better, do that. To that effect, very much. We're all learning. It's not going to be perfect. It's about connection and moving to that better place together.
I want to jump in on that too. I like that idea of Aikido as atemi, as action. And I just want to add one more word, as service. I know I'm an English professor, and I started to not be able to stand teaching on campus with kids that don't know why they're there, except their parents are paying for it, and it's the next thing to do. Another nod to Sensei Coronavirus, who's pretty much busted that one open. So in the last couple of years, I transitioned fully over to print-based correspondence courses with incarcerated students. If you think about it, those are the ones that don't have access to college any other way because they don't have access to the internet. And now with the coronavirus and lockdown, they're not, colleges that bring programs into the prison are not being allowed to do that. So I pick up my jail mail from my mailbox every day, and it feels like my protest to work with, oh gosh, to call them underserved population is such an understatement. To work with what other people would consider roaches and rodents of people, you know, and to give them a chance to redeem themselves, to tell their stories, because guess what? They're going to come out here too, eventually. And do we want them to come out with a chip on their shoulder? Or do we want them to come out having read Terry Dobson's story about a kind word turneth away wrath? And that's what I assign in English 101. Anyway, Aikido as service, as action. Yeah.
We've got a nice question here in the chat about looking at the comparison between Martin Luther King and Gandhi and the principles of nonviolence. And specifically, if we could take that nonviolence principle that is so embodied in what we all have been studying in Aikido and apply it to not only the current protests for Black Lives Matter, but just protests in general. If we as a body of Aikidoists had anything to offer the movement, what would we offer? I think that's the gist of the question.
Nonviolence is really interesting. I talked about that, right? Time on the mat, getting literally beaten and handing it back. That environment let me be in a barrage of rubber bullets and being tear gassed. And I wasn't giving it back. And that was a choice. Not everyone has that training. People, I can solidly tell you, most of the people that were being gassed and hit with me did not have 20 years of martial arts training under their belt. So nonviolence is this practice you need to train, right? And that expectation that nonviolence is just in us all like that is ridiculous.
I agree.
Yeah.
Very. Thank you, Kat. Yeah, I'm good.
When attacked like that, I mean, you could strike back and escalate, or you could leave. And if you leave, there's no violence. Everything's calm again. And that's not okay. But holding your space, even though there's this conflict and danger, keeping yourself as safe as possible, that's, I think, where the Aikido training comes in. That's why, you know, my dear daughter's out there on the streets of Minneapolis, rather than just going home. This, you know, the best way, you know, they would have you think that the best way to be nonviolent is to just leave it alone. Be, you know, be quiet, shut up. And there's so many ways of shutting people up, whether through laws or through Japanese etiquette, and, or, you know, there's so many ways I wanted to shut up, calling me a, you know, fomenter of scurrilous activity, and I should just tuck my head in between my whatever and go home. I mean, like, no, I think that's great. So, you know, holding that space, there is violence, but you are not escalating, doing best to diffuse it, but don't leave because of it. Don't, you know, you want to hold that line, hold your space, but not rigidly, not just, you know, on the principal thing, still listening and responding, not just digging your heels in, but existing in that space.
And to continue off of that, to answer Robert's question further, I think what Aikido has to offer us in terms of response to protest is Aikido offers ukemi. And ukemi, I think, is ultimately listening. It's being willing to listen and respond and accept. And I think that we need to apply our ukemi by listening to what's going on and changing as a result of that.
I'll go further with ukemi. When you're teaching someone, you can teach through ukemi. That person feels safe and in power still because they're doing the technique. They don't know how much your ukemi in the same way can be leading them. So really taking that back seat per se and being comfortable with that, but also having that really subtle power, that really soft hand in order to lead someone to a better place. And I think this has to be explored more in conversations that you have all the time, just helping someone walk to that next step by themselves. And if they come to that realization kind of without you beating them over the head with it, they'll probably, hopefully, have that be a more authentic and deep realization for themselves. And maybe they can also help someone else walk there too.
I love listening to you, Sam. You're so wise. I can't wait to meet you. I think this is good too, because we always talk about Aikido and conflict. And I think conflict is a really big word. And I think challenge, confrontation, conflict, they're all kind of different things. And I think all the protests and everything that's happening is helping Aikido people maybe have a better relationship with the different scopes of what all that can be. I mean, competition and conflict is totally different. And what does that mean to each of us? And so I think it's a good opportunity for harmonious, peaceful practitioners like ourselves to get out there and feel a different flavor inside and be okay with that. So, yeah.
And also what my mom said, what is the width of your harmonious bubble? Is it just, I get to meditate in my dojo and do zazen alone, and this is an entirely peaceful moment for me? Is it, I'm aware that my neighborhood is suffering. It may be need some more community resources. Am I aware that my country is in grief right now? Or that the world is having a global pandemic? Kind of where is your harmonious bubble, and how do you exist in that uncomfortability, but still come to that with love and pursue a world that could be, that should be. So.
Yeah. I just feel lucky. I'm in San Diego, where I don't know if it's just fortune and good luck. I mean, I'm super gay. There's a big gay flag in front of the lobby of the dojo, spray painted the back of my wall. Some people hated it. Some people didn't care. But at the end of the day, I've just had no issues at all. I've been so lucky to be around kindness and love and mostly support the last few years. And then I see what's going on outside, and I just realize how blind I've been, and how 2,000 miles away is like a world away with certain things. So I'm just catching up, getting educated on everything. So I appreciate all your insight. Yeah.
What about following up on that question of, dojos in this current, world that is in crisis, that has been turned on its head in terms of protest and our Black Lives Matter movement, and everyone really trying to figure out, Aikido primarily being white and being of privilege, how to respond. And we all have, as you all have been saying, that bubble of our comfort zone of where we respond, and some dojos being like, I don't even want to get into politics on one end, right? And I'm like, I'm sorry, but even like Ben & Jerry's, an ice cream company, is getting into politics and posting Black Lives Matter on their website. If Aikidoists don't think that they have a responsibility to do that, I'm not sure kind of who does, right? But beyond even just putting like a statement on your website, what is the breadth of our response? What could it be?
I mean,
I'll take a whack at that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kat.
No, Sensei, please go ahead. I don't even know what I was going to say.
I'm a bit of a Ronin. I saw the hypocrisy in the Aikido world that I was in. The rigid hierarchy, the womanizing, don't get me started. It was a lot of things. And I couldn't stomach it. And I left, and I came to a rural area here in Colorado. And I gave up, being promoted more. I understand what I gave up. So I'm an Edon, and I'll never be more than that. But I started my own dojo with underserved population here, a lot of Hispanics, a lot of poor whites. And that felt right to me. That felt like a protest. In hindsight, I would say that I did not want to stay in that bubble of Mill Valley, San Francisco Bay Area Aikido. as wonderful as that was for my development, I had to leave it to go the next step. And as I've said before, then I've taken Aikido kind of in disguise into the prison world. I realized that I couldn't be upfront about that because that freaked out the administration of naturally. You're teaching a martial art to incarcerate? No, okay, so we'll call it meditation, movement meditation, whatever you want it, I'll just call it whatever makes you happy. But it was definitely the principles. And I collected a lot of anecdotes, especially when I was volunteering in the women's prison, that just basic things like being fluent in the shapes of Aikido, circle, square, and triangle, and working on taking those shapes in your body, squaring up to something, standing your ground, holding your back, blending, making a point, all those things were just so helpful in their day-to-day lives. So I don't want to stay stuck in the dojo, and also that's why I plug my book. I feel like the Aikido has been richer for me off the mat.
I was recently on a panel with Honor Eric Moye Sensei, and he said something I loved and that I want to expand upon. He said, take your dojo and move it to the hood. That has still negative connotations, but really I love that you need to bring your Aikido wherever you go, and you need to go where it's needed. That our training and our experiences, someone else is commenting in the chat, just being able to help others through this, and your training, that intent, that de-escalation, having that knowledge is not something that should be hoarded, and it's a very different learning style, right? Kind of Japanese, you need to steal this, like watch me and steal it. That's how you learn, and I am good at that. That's why I've been able to learn from so many different people, but other people aren't. And so making it as available as possible, as accessible as possible, teaching in so many different ways, being flexible so that as many students can be reached is really critical. And that's not just in a dojo or in a local YMCA. That's right, reaching out to your local community members, lawmakers, and trying to expand where your Aikido can reach.
Yeah, beautiful. This is such a great conversation. I want to keep it going, but I also want to be respectful of our time. And I know some of our panelists have some constraints. So we are hitting 10 o'clock. So if anyone does need to leave, with huge gratitude, I would say thank you, and please go on with your day. For those who are able to, and if our panelists, other panelists want to stay on and take some more questions, keep the conversation going for another, let's say 15 minutes, let's do that. And
Okay,
thank you, Kat Sensei.
Yes, thank you so much, Sensei, for the invitation to everybody, and my best respects to everyone. Thank you, and I do have to go get my child, so I'm just encouraged and inspired by the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat.
Bye. Can I make a comment? Just taking up what Kathy said, just as kind of as a throwaway, but she mentioned she's just a Nidan. And I know she doesn't think of herself that way, but if we value ourselves only as we're valued in these institutions, in these hierarchies, playing by their rules, we can't make change. People talk about change from within, but if the rules themselves keep you down, you somehow have to step aside from that, as Kathy did. And I know she's not doing it apologetically. It's a choice. But say you're just a Nidan. Same thing with institutionalized racism. I mean, there's some when the rules are in there, you need to step out of that, make new rules, because they can use every rule they have to, squash a protest. And protests are really just asking for what you need and deserve. So that in the Aikido community, just that whole hierarchy, you can see how that just keeps people from down. They're afraid to speak up, to change things, because they lose their place in that hierarchy. We need to be outside of that. Not that it can't exist, it just can't keep people down. It's like, if their rules are according to my principles, that's great. But when they're not, when there's a clash between them, I'm going to go by my own principles.
Yeah.
And then
I'm gonna let no hierarchy keep me down. Yeah.
and still doing that work, right, to change the hierarchy, the system, to defund or dismantle it, some may say, because it was intentionally built to consolidate power and keep those in power there. So
Change and relieve.
Absolutely.
and then, right, what Kathy Sensei said, also knowing and being at peace with what you're giving up in the current world is really hard, really scary, but also extremely freeing.
Right. If protesting is scary, not protesting is scarier. Speaking up is scary, not is worse. You feel like that. You're taught to believe that. But if you aren't afraid of losing anything, there's nothing they can take away from you. Just because all the things we think are binding us, really, they don't matter. So we can let that go and, do the right thing and then deal with the consequences. And you're not stuck.
Yeah, let's maybe either open it up, or if our panelists want to kind of make their final statements as we wrap things up.
There was a question in the chat about who's going to teach in the hood, I think it said. Did anyone else see that?
What was the question?
I think it said who's going to teach in the hood.
Oh, who?
I'm looking for it.
Yeah. Oh, it's just, I saw that. It talked also about the barriers, right? Money and getting there. And I know that dojos often operate on like a tight budget. We spoke to this a little yesterday in the race and Aikido panel, just being a nonprofit and getting that funding, really seeking it in order to be able to travel to where per se Aikido is needed. And yeah, that takes time and money. And the barriers that one may be facing in that are barriers that other people face every day. And so it is inconvenient, it is uncomfortable, and we have to exist in that space for a while.
I think that, thinking strategically about how to do that, from my own experience, I teach Aikido in a mosque, and I started doing that because somebody asked me to. And they came up with mats, and they provided students, and they provided a way to make the money appear, and that's just what I did. And I'm thinking perhaps some Black churches would want something like that. And if somebody was interested and ambitious about it and thought that it could be something valuable to offer, maybe not something as like, I'm going there to make a bunch of money, because that shouldn't be the objective. It should be like, hey, there's this really great thing called Aikido that we'd like to share. It might be a good approach. And because it was a question about like power dynamics, I think that, giving up some of the power of how the class is run, maybe letting go of some hierarchical power structures that are part of it in a different environment, I think that that would really go a long way to help bring Aikido to underserved populations.
And also know that you're not going alone. You're going to make a connection with the whole community. Just like what Meredith said, this community rose up to help her teach. They wanted that, and they made the resources happen. And so go to make a connection with that community, not go because you're this savior that's coming in and, oh, it's only me, I'm taking on this burden. It is burdensome, but you're not the only one carrying it.
I think it's a beautiful idea too. I was going to say, just being really creative and thinking outside the box. Like, who here on the panel can be like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to see what kind of connection I can make to go volunteer and teach Aikido in a Black church. Like, I love it. And I think it also gets to, though, who is teaching, which I think is a really good question, because I think, in our earlier panel yesterday too, it's not like we can clone Sam and have her go teach, in all of the hood dojos or all of the Black churches. We actually need to figure out how to actually bring up more young people, more people of color who can be more representative of the populations that we want to reach. And that may mean not just being like, why are they not on my mat? How come they haven't been attracted to Aikido? but how do I create a program, maybe even a paid Uchideshi program, to get more young people, people of color, trained in the principles and practices of Aikido so that they can be the ambassadors, to be going out there, to be role models.
And definitely, right, this is a long timeline. It's, people think, oh, I did one thing and it didn't work, so wow, damn, that was my effort. I've already been doing this 21 years. That's a long time. And for someone to start tomorrow, that is awesome. To see how they apply it, that's amazing. But also 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30, 40, those are all really different practices for really different people, because it takes a long time. It's not an immediate fix.
I want to echo that, Sam. I was trying to write down my background as a protester, and of course it would go back to the Poor People's March in DC in the 60s, and the Vietnam War and women's liberation, and Rocky Flats Encirclement Day, both Gulf Wars, Women's March, you know, a lot of things. And there's a time and place for being a protester in a quote unquote protest. And so that's one point, but that's not the only form of protest, which I think I've spoken to already. There are other ways to take action. And, oh gosh, there was one more thing, and I think it got lost in chemo fog, but there's a history. There's a history in back of us. And if we keep that, a history of protest, a great history of protest that's been happening for a long time, and that's happening now in this country, in many different countries, we need to put that support at our backs, okay, so that we don't feel alone, because we're not. And this is a slow process. This has to go root deep to make a change that's actually going to hold. No, this is nothing less than a change in consciousness. I'm not interested in going back to normal. Normal's what got us into this mess. I'm with Greta on that. I actually liked the lockdown. It was quiet. It was peaceful. The air got clear. But I've left normal behind a long time ago. I think there's a great advantage in separating, in not being attached to being normal anymore, in whatever way that comes through. For me, that's physically, with my eyes, and also now with cancer. Normal's not all that it's cracked up to be. And there's a great freedom in declaring your independence from it. I don't know exactly how that fits into Aikido, except that it's a great, it's a freedom.
Great. I'm going to say we've got a couple of really good chats happening, both from Daniel and Dina. And so to maybe have them join us, open your mics, and talk about the programs that you have just written about, things going on in New York. That'd be great.
Well, first, I'd like to say to Ms. Park, Kathy Park Sensei, your whole existence is just a wonderful, you know, the idea of normal is overrated. Those wonderful. I thank you so much. What you've said has inspired me, because, you know, Sam knows me. I'm pissed off, but I think you are amazing, and I wish you all the best. So now, having said that, with regard to Aikido in the Hood, it's hard to convey it, you know, when you're writing it in chat. The thing is, you know, as I said yesterday, particularly in the Harlem, Bronx, Brooklyn area, there have been many people who have done Aikido kind of on the side or off the mat, so not off the mat, out of the spotlight. That's what I mean to say. The barrier to entry that I speak about is within New York. Well, actually, let me back up. Let me give you an example. Someone I know tried to put Aikido into a well-structured organization. And so the person contacted someone else who has, you know, access to the resources to make it happen, teachers, money, space, all of those things. And the response was, oh, well, you have to pay for this, and we'll send this person. And the person that they wanted to send, first of all, the money that they wanted to charge was ridiculous when you're talking about average people. And then the second was they were sending a person who couldn't relate to the students, to the children, to the diverse population. And so it's wonderful that we have this energy where we want to go to the hood. Sam, you're right. The hood in and of itself can have a negative connotation. But when you are speaking to people who live there, it's a wonderful connotation because they're like, yeah, you understand me. You're talking to me. So it's about language. It's about, you know, how do we relate? How do we understand the worldview and the value system of the people whom we're trying to teach? Yesterday, a gentleman talked about, you know, you have to be able, everybody brings something to the mat. There's a fear, there's something. And so when you're going into the hood, you really just have to understand it. So one of the jokes that I said is, you try to go into a Black church and say, I've got this Aikido thing, you're going to get decimated. It's a very, you know, because the worldview, the value systems, the competing interests, you know, wherever two people get together in a room, you're going to have politics. We can't avoid it. So the idea becomes, what's the language and how do we learn how to break down barriers to communication so we can do something that moves us forward together? We don't have to like each other and love each other. I may not end up in your house for dinner, but I can learn something and walk away from the situation with more than I had that enhances my ability to be productive in the universe. And that's how I see Aikido. And that's how I received it in the hood as well. Because I started in New York Aikikai, then I went to a small community dojo in Harlem at the Harlem YMCA. And the gentleman who ran that dojo was a former member of the Nation of Islam. He was a former bodyguard for Malcolm X. He wasn't on duty the night that he was assassinated. But, you know, so there's a lot of history behind people trying to learn Aikido in the hood. And it's a matter of how do we connect with them in what's not what I would call an esoteric way. You know, when people are struggling to survive and thrive and they've got these mindsets and you say, well, you know, and I'm going to be extreme here. You say, well, you know, we've got this worldview and it's going to unite the world and we're going to teach you all how to love. And Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, you're going to lose credibility. They're not going to pay any attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Very much. I think that's what we spoke to a little bit. This was also in the other panel where I talked about code switching, where who's doing that socio-emotional work to communicate? Like, yes, it's hard. You need to turn that on its head and learn. It's like full immersion is the best way to learn. So even if, right, you're berated, decimated, you need to be there to really understand how to connect, understand the language, and really push through that. Like, you gotta stay. It's not going to be nice, but you gotta stay.
And you need people, as you said, you're not alone. You need people to come in and help break down the barrier. So to the particular example that I mentioned, when the person told me this is what they wanted to do, I told them how to get around it, you know, because, you know, I'm part of the population that gets pushed to the periphery. So I know how to get around it. My whole life is about getting around things, you know, but didn't pay attention, hit the wall, and I was like, I told you. So, you know, it's just about, as I said yesterday, individuals having a collective behavior to break down the systemic barrier. I think that's the point, maybe.
Yeah, I think the idea too that a systemic problem needs a systemic answer. And how do we as an Aikido community bring our resources and realize what we're lacking in terms of our resources and our approach to that systemic problem. So really brilliant addition to the conversation. Thank you, Dina, for jumping in there. We're at way past time, so I think what I am going to do is, if you haven't already, shared contact information with us, we will be sending out. People are listing a lot of resources, wanting to connect people. This is just the beginning of the conversation. Just as a reminder to everyone, in starting the Solstice seminar, our real mission is to broaden the reach of Aikido and really to make Aikido come into a more inclusive future. So hopefully this is the first step for connecting people, having the conversations and connecting the people who need to be talking to each other. We're already seeing that happen, which I love. And then continuing, as I've said before, there's more than one solstice during the year. The idea that we may be continuing using this medium and a way to bring such an incredibly thoughtful group of people together. I do feel like the creativity that was brought into this panel and the way people are thinking and talking, both from the head, from the heart, and connecting it to our Aikido principles. I just want to do a big shout out to all of the incredible panelists that we had on today for sharing your perspective, really kind of pushing the envelope about how we're thinking about this topic. Super, super valuable. And let's keep the conversation going. And also, if you, a huge thank you to everyone participating, because as you all know, this was by donation, and we are contributing donations, really wanting to live our values. Contributions are going to Black Lives Matter. If you haven't had a chance to donate, you still can do that. Just a huge thank you for everyone's commitment to this path.